Welcome to The Social. It is Friday. So happy to have you here with us today and every day. All right, ladies, we're going to dive into a controversy that has been just blowing up online and beyond. How do you engage with friends or colleagues who don't seem to understand the reasons behind the protests happening either in the United States or here or, in fact, around the world? Well, NFLer Malcolm Jenkins is calling out his teammate, superstar quarterback Drew Brees of the New Orleans Saints, saying he was extremely hurt by comments that Brees made in an interview earlier this week, where Brees said he does not understand anybody who would disrespect the American flag by kneeling in peaceful protest. Drew has received a massive backlash to those comments, and he has now since apologized. But what do you make of this story?
Well, it's a direct verbal shot at Colin Kaepernick and what was very much a peaceful protest about police brutality. I can't help but think, Mel, what would have happened if white superstars like Drew Brees, like Aaron Rodgers, like Tom Brady, who famously opened his locker during a press conference and showed Make America Great Again cap sitting there, stood up for Colin Kaepernick and said and showed in strong action, we're not taking the field unless Colin can take the field. What would have happened then? The NFL, that literally owns a day of the week, might have come to a standstill. But instead, there was largely silence. And Colin Kaepernick is still out of a job. I mean, this is unbelievable because quarterbacks in particular are protected by a lot of black bodies who take hits for them, protect them. You know, there's that whole adage in football, protect the quarterback by any means necessary. Who is protecting these black players now?
Yeah, Marcy, it's a great point. And I remember that earlier this week when we were talking about celebrities speaking up against racism, anti-Black racism, and supporting Black Lives Matter, you said that you were, taking names and making a list. And Donovan Bennett, who's a sports analyst for Sportsnet, wrote an article this week about white athletes and whether or not they've been stepping up, who's been stepping up, and why it's important that white athletes do so. One of the white athletes who has, written in support and declared his support for Black Lives Matter is Jonathan Toews, NHL superstar, captain of the Chicago Blackhawks. He posted a video on his Instagram and then a lengthy caption. And he was very specific in his caption about why he supports Black Lives Matter beyond the obvious. And I just want to read a couple of lines. He said that I'll be the first to admit that as a white male, my first reaction may not have been great, but who am I to tell someone that their pain is not real? Then he got even more specific, saying, I'm not condoning or approving the looting, but are we really going to sit here and say that peaceful protesting is the only answer? There's been plenty of time for that. And if it was the answer, we could have given it our full attention long ago. That's important because a lot of the criticism about Black Lives Matter has been about protesting and whatever violence. And so for Jonathan Toews, a white hockey player playing in a sport that is largely white, both players and audience, you have to imagine who his audience is. And what is interesting, too, is that, of course, there were messages of support for Jonathan Toews, but he was also attacked by, all lives matter people and from racists who turned against him. So he put himself out there. And I think that is what a lot of Black athletes have been saying about wanting their colleagues to join them. Every day in being Black, we put ourselves at risk. So you showing up for us isn't all that risky, but we would appreciate it if you could assume some of the burden for us. And so, listen, we don't need to give a gold star to Jonathan Toews for doing what's right, but I think he did model what's right for other hockey players, and many huge NHL superstars have not come out to support Black Lives Matter. And they play in cities where Black citizens are under attack all the time, including Jonathan Toews, and he did it. So good on him.
It's a start. It's a start. Last night, a number of notable NFL players posted a video simultaneously across their various social media channels. And it was a call to action and a call to the league. I want you to take a look.
It's been 10 days since George Floyd was brutally murdered.
How many times do we need to ask you to listen to your players?
What will it take
for one of us to be murdered by police brutality?
What if I was George Floyd?
If I was George Floyd?
What if I was George Floyd?
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 I am George Floyd.
I am Breonna.
Okay, I encourage you to actually Google this afterwards and look at the whole clip because it's very, very powerful. But what we need now, to echo your points, is more white athletes coming out, and not just with platitudes, with actually, an apology for the response, the lack thereof, when Colin Kaepernick kneeled down during the anthem, but also actionable ways about how our managers, how our athletes, how are they all going to be doing better. And I just want to talk briefly about this idea of the offensive nature, supposedly, of taking the knee. So many people have come out and said this was against America. And I just want to say that part of this, in my opinion, highlights the many ways in which this idea of how we learn about patriotism and nationalism, in particular America, let's be honest, they have often gone around with a feeling of superiority. You hear it echoed in Donald Trump constantly, but this idea that this is the greatest place in the world, that you would never do anything to disrespect the flag or the anthem. And I can't help but think, what exactly does that mean? Does that mean that you can never question the people in power? Is that what we mean? I think we have to question that a little bit, because you do have to hold space for the ugly truths that pretty much every country has in their history. And don't get me wrong, it's important to feel pride for your country, but it can't be blind pride. And I think when you have blind pride towards your country, when it's steeped in kind of an imaginary nostalgia and, one version of what that country looks like, that's how you get Make America Great Again. And I think Canada has its own sets of problems alongside that. So we have to allow space, and clearly there was an attempt at making many peaceful protests or peaceful gestures to draw attention to issues, and they were left unheard. And so the more that you squash voices, the more they burble up to the surface in untethered ways, let's just say.
I want to jump off of that because when you talk about how to make real change and then addressing what Drew Brees said, Drew Brees showed what is lacking right now, particularly with white America and all of us, which is a lack of a wholesome education. I mean, I've been thinking so deeply on what are the ways that we're going to make tangible change here. And that is battlegrounds, which is education. Drew Brees said, if someone has fought in the war and comes home, that is disrespectful to that person. And Malcolm Jenkins in his video said, I'm going to tell you something, Drew. My grandfather, a black man, fought in World War II. He fought and he also came home. And guess what? He didn't come home to a hero's welcome. In fact, he was spat on and yelled at when he would walk the streets in any way wearing his uniform. And so to me, that says a lack of a wholesome picture of American history. We're guilty of that here too. And it made me go do that deep dive. The Tuskegee Airmen, there's been movies made about them, but they were a group of military pilots, African-American largely, some Caribbean pilots as well. And they fought under the American flag in World War II. And when they came home, not only did they fight under the American flag in World War II, they also did so when the military was officially racially segregated and Jim Crow laws were in full effect in the United States. So, Drew, this points to the bigger picture. What history are we all getting in elementary school and beyond? Because Drew's assessment of what respect to the flag means is factually wrong if you look at it through the lens of an African American. And there you lie. That's where you're like, that's where we need to start to tackle this. Education, police reform, prison reform, criminal justice reform. There are areas that are tangibly going to make a difference in how we look at comments made by people like Drew Brees.